Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for October 26, 2025, and I'm Jaded Rand.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as Brendan hops on the piano and we talk about the greatest musicals of all time.
I can't play piano,
Songs from...
but I can play some bass. I can play some bass behind you. Might sound a little empty without the other accompaniment, but...
Yeah, I took piano lessons as a kid for about 3 weeks and decided not for me.
Not for you. You're more of a hockey player.
Yeah. At that age, it is one of those things I do sort of kind of regret, because today as an adult, I love the piano. It's actually one of my favorite instruments. I could just listen to a great piano tune all day long, which maybe spoiler alert for the conversation. The score to this film, I've listened to the whole thing at least twice through already, because the whole thing is just a piano motif the whole time. There's something so relaxing about it. Like, I just love the piano. It's simple but complex at the same time. I don't know. There's just something about it I adore.
Knowing that, JD, I have quite a few great recommendations for you.
Yeah, send them along.
And honestly,
Send 'em along.
one of those recommendations will maybe be in relation to the conversation we're about to have.
Okay. All righty. So it is a bit ironic that I gave up on it as a kid, but when I was 9 or 10, when I was having those lessons, all I wanted to do was play hockey and football. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, you were
look, I was a
definitely
kid.
cut from
What are you gonna
you
do?
were cut from a different cloth. I started playing the trumpet
Yeah.
when I was in 5th grade, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah.
That was so that was where I was playing soccer at the same time. I was one of those kids that balanced the two. I was probably the only one in my entire school that actually did both sports and music at the same time for a good chunk of my time in elementary school, middle school, and even some of high school. It was more about there were more cliques in my high school that had to make the choice between art and sports, and I tried doing both. Didn't want to conform to those kind of dramatic cliques.
I do wish that I did that more as a kid, which is so funny because as an adult, I very much have a split personality between sports and art. I'm in both worlds quite deeply. As a kid, and it's funny because I am doing a podcast with you about film and art-centric podcast, but as a kid, the only balancing act for me was how many sports I could do. I was doing hockey, football, basketball. I played soccer for some years in high school as well, baseball until I was 14. I was balancing all of that was my life, was just doing all of that.
Yeah, I tried every sport at least once. A lot of them didn't stick. Soccer was the one that stuck for me, but I did play baseball for a little bit. Basketball one year. Yeah,
Soccer I didn't play as much. My high school soccer days are hilarious because I was only there because of hockey. And maybe that's a story I can tell on the main show.
That's interesting. Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear that.
But mostly I did basketball. Like, I did baseball till I was 14, football all the way up to high school, basketball all the way through high school, hockey all the way through high school. Yeah, I was doing it all. But like in the middle of that, in my high school years, is when the art thing started to come, at least in terms of my interest in it. I'm not much of an artist myself, but I obviously have a passionate interest in the arts now.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that I get to experience that and live that through with my kids. Sam is a gifted athlete. He does not have the same passions that I did, the same commitments that I did when I was his age, but he is a musical theater nerd at heart. He doesn't know it yet, but he is way more of an artist than he is an athlete. He loves to play dress up. He has that imagination.
I think this is more commonplace now than it was for maybe like when we were growing up. I mean, when I was in college, a lot of my best friends that I met, let's say in like like the Penn State Thespians, for instance, they were all big jocks at heart at the same time. They would put on a production for some play, and then the next day they'd get together for their intramural basketball team. So
yeah,
I love that. I love being able to find that middle ground. I love that.
All right. With that said, let's talk about Richard Linklater. That's who we're really here to talk about.
What a
on this
transition!
episode.
That made well, actually, it is kind of a great transition because remember, Richard Linklater was a bit of a baseball player who became
He is,
filmmaker.
yeah.
So he is someone that
Absolutely.
absolutely straddled the line between artist and jock, right? So
100%.
yeah, we found
And-
it. We found the transition.
we got there. Richard Linklater, he is back with Blue Moon. And I think what's so interesting about this movie is a couple of things. It is the Richard Linklater, I want to say walk and talk, but there's not as much walking here, but it's in the same spirit as that. It is a hangout movie. We have talked about the Linklater hangout movies quite a bit here on the show. We just had a top 5 on the main show this last week that was inspired by the Linklater hangout movie. And that's a list that has been 10 years in the making because Brennan has talked about them incessantly over those last 10 years, which was a really fun list to do. So here we are with the new Linklater hangout movie. It's also a music movie, Brendan being the music head of the two of us, as we just stated. So I am deeply, deeply curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, because on paper, this is the greatest movie of the year, right?
It has Brennan Cassidy written all over it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. Do you have any other table setting you want to get to? I mean, we've talked about Linklater a lot over the years. I don't know if there are any Linklater thoughts you want to lay out before we get into this.
No, I think we've talked about him quite extensively, and especially for those who did listen to our last main show where we did our top 5 hangout movies. I guess, spoiler alert, we both had a Linklater film in each of our number 1 spots. I won't say what that film was for each of us, but it gave us an opportunity to talk a lot about why we love the hangout vibes of Richard Linklater. I guess if there is any table setting with regard to Blue Moon, I will admit I was mostly familiar with the work of Lorenz Hart and Richard Rodgers. Obviously, Richard Rodgers, the composer, being most known for his partnership with Oscar Hammerstein. And this movie takes place during the premiere of their biggest hit, Oklahoma, which, as we'll talk about, was the first time that Richard Rodgers chose to work with someone else outside of Lorenz Hart. Lorenz Hart was his lyricist, and in this movie, Lorenz Hart is portrayed by Ethan Hawke. There are some songs that the two of them, Hart and Rodgers specifically, wrote together that I absolutely love, primarily because many of them were I first heard as renditions by some of my favorite jazz artists.
Yeah.
And if there's ever a recommendation for you, JD, for someone who loves piano music, some of the greatest jazz pianists of all time you might enjoy have actually done renditions of Hart and Rodgers. One of my favorite songs is a song called My Romance. It was originally in a 1930s musical called Jumbo. It's most known for being performed by Doris Day in the film version of Jumbo from the 1960s, but in the early 60s, it was covered by the Bill Evans Trio on an album called Waltz for Debbie. It's a live album, and it's some of the most gorgeous stuff you'll ever hear. I highly recommend that, JD. Absolutely recommend that.
Okay. I will be writing that down. I will absolutely listen to those as soon as I can later on this week. It's interesting. I obviously don't have the musical background that you do, but one thing that came to mind earlier with this film, because early on they mentioned the Lorenz Hart song, My Funny Valentine.
I knew you were going to make this comparison.
Yes, it's hilarious because Ethan Hawke has already sung a rendition of this in the Chet Baker biopic that we talked about funny enough about 10 years ago, it seems like.
Yeah.
Was that 2016? I think that was 2016 that movie came out.
May have been 2017 at the very latest. I think it was
2017?
2016 actually, because I know it was the same year that Don Cheadle did Miles Ahead, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Love those two movies. So that connection I thought was hilarious. I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if that was the beginning of Ethan Hawke wanting to do this movie or to do a movie about Lorenz Hart. I don't really know what that process was like, but
I do want to cut you off for a moment because I wouldn't be surprised if there is a correlation there, because from what I understand, the writer for the movie Blue Moon here, Robert Kaplow, was apparently working on this for about 12 years.
Okay.
So maybe there was some, at the very least, some conversations that were had regarding Ethan Hawke's history with Lorenz Hart's material in some ways. Robert Kaplow, who did write the movie Blue Moon, is associated with Richard Linklater. He was one of the original writers on Me and Orson Welles. Remember that movie from 2008?
Oh, yeah.
So there had to have been some rumblings between these people in the same room. I mean, there had to have been.
I mean, I think between the Linklater-Hawke relationship in general, I'm sure that that played a big role in and of itself, obviously.
Right.
But you do have to wonder that they saw that movie, the Chet Baker biopic, and saw that connection as it relates to Blue Moon and this script, and decided, you know what, this just makes all the more sense.
Makes perfect
cast
sense.
Ethan Hawke as this character. So I think that there's probably some correlation there, but who knows? Maybe it's just a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, I think maybe what I was most excited for with this film, with Blue Moon, is that it's the first hangout movie since Everybody Wants Some, for Linklater specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Hitman last year. I thought that was really fun, really good movie. Enjoyed that a lot. And I really liked Apollo 10.5. But we haven't had a really good let's just vibe with Linklater and Ethan Hawke in quite some time.
I will say Apollo 10.5 does have a lot of that, though. It does kind of have a meandering quality to it, and it crystallizes in a way that has sort of a philosophical edge where you ponder on what you just saw in the same way that you might something like Dazed and Confused or Before Sunset or even Everybody Wants Some. I do think there is a bit of a through line there, certainly more so than what was that movie he directed with Cate Blanchett? Where'd You Go, Bernadette?
Bernadette, yeah.
Yeah, probably so far to this day, probably the least Richard Linklater film there ever was.
Yeah, for sure. I was just excited to get back to that Everybody Wants Some before series kind of hangout. That's what I was most excited for with Blue Moon. At least I wasn't exactly sure that's what we were getting with this film until I started to watch it. And after seeing the film, it was great to be back in that space with Linklater. With that said, I guess we can go ahead and jump into this one. Blue Moon is, you're never going to believe this, directed by Richard Linklater. It stars Ethan Hawke, Margaret Qualley, Bobby Cannavale, Andrew Scott, Patrick Kennedy, absolutely worth mentioning here, Simon Delaney as well, and others that come and go. If you're not familiar with Blue Moon, it tells the story of Lorenz Hart and his struggles with alcoholism and mental health as he tries to save face during the opening night of Oklahoma. I guess to be a little bit more specific, it is the opening night of Oklahoma, but mostly this takes place at a bar across the street.
Yeah.
With the first half of the film really being Lorenz and the bartender there and a few others, before Andrew Scott's Richard Rogers and Simon Delaney's Oscar Hammerstein, they all come in, and then there's a celebration of Oklahoma.
Yeah, the after party takes place at the same bar.
At the same bar. Okay, with that said, Brendan, I'm very, very anxious to hear what you have to say. What did you think about Blue Moon?
I hated this movie.
Oh my God, really?
No, I did not hate this movie.
I was going to say, I would have been really surprised.
No, I very much enjoyed this movie. To what extent I enjoyed this movie, I'm still wrestling with, and maybe this conversation will help me answer some of those. I don't want to say reservations, but some things I'm still pondering on. But you are right in the sense that this very much feels like a Richard Linklater hangout movie. And I was very pleased to see that as well, because when Richard Linklater directs a movie that he's not credited as a co-writer on, I usually get nervous about those things.
Yeah.
Because I do think there is a bit of a distinction between a Richard Linklater film and a film directed by Richard Linklater. And not to say that either one is bad or good or one's better than the other. It's just when he directs a movie that he's not credited as a co-writer on, they don't quite have the same things that I love the most from Richard Linklater, which are those meandering hangout vibes. But Blue Moon absolutely does have that. I'd say, if anything, it does feel very much akin to something like Before Sunset. The only difference is that instead of taking place in Paris, it takes place in a bar. But it has a very similar momentum to it, a very similar conversational momentum specifically, which I very much did enjoy. And I think Ethan Hawke is this his best performance? This might be. I don't know if I'm ready to say that just yet, but it is. I think it's in the conversation. He does a really great job carrying this thing. And, for a script that isn't written by Richard Linklater, Robert Kaplow, I think, captures enough of what makes a Linklater film so effective for me. And maybe a lot of that is just Linklater being such a great director, knowing how to capture this material. I do wonder if it's maybe a more literalized version of what a Linklater film could be. There are moments here that very clearly spell out what this movie is trying to suggest thematically and emotionally. It doesn't quite have the same philosophical spirit as Linklater's best films. And not that that's a bad thing. It's not a historical film, but it is a historical reenactment of sorts, or a historical interpretation, rather. But it is one of those movies I definitely enjoyed more in the moment. It doesn't stimulate me in the same way that, let's say, Everybody Wants Some does, which I feel like I'm able to find a new meaning for the more I think about that one. Blue Moon is certainly a more direct film. It's a more literal film. It's not very subtle at all. And I guess I'm trying to come to terms with whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing here. I think at this point, I would say it's a good thing, because this is ultimately a pretty emotional experience, thanks to Ethan Hawke's great performance and the way he captures the feeling of a betrayed artist, essentially. And given his history with alcoholism, you can certainly understand why. And he's not shy. He's not shy about that. But I do think he does a great job capturing that pain and the feeling that an artist has been left to die, essentially. And I do think in that regard, the movie is very effective.
Yeah, I don't think this is my favorite Linklater film, but it is Linklater enough that I did find it still quite enjoyable in the end. It's weird, though, perhaps ironically, because it almost feels imitative of a Linklater film. There is something about the screenplay here that's adjacent of Linklater's patented organic poetry, but at the same time, it's almost like it's obligated to shoehorn in conventional biopic hazards. So for all of Ethan Hawke's incredible scene chewing, and I agree with you, he is really, really good here.
Yeah.
And those moments feel like it has the freedom to create its own language and ways of operating. The film also includes scenes like the one of E.B. White and him getting the idea for Stuart Little because Lawrence mentioned something about a mouse in his apartment, or Lawrence telling a young George Hill to remember that friendships make for the best movies. And what is George Hill known for? The Sting, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Slapshot, which is one of my favorites of his.
Yeah.
These moments are totally unnecessary, and I don't think they serve anything here other than a trite wink to the audience. There is plenty to mine, and I think why those audience servicing moments don't really work for me here is because there is so much to mine on its own terms. The irony that Lorenz and Richard had worked together for 20 years creating some huge hits along the way, only for Richard to pivot to working with another lyricist and create by far his most popular work to that moment anyway with Oklahoma. Something that Lorenz verbalizes in the film. He's very aware and speaks to his jealousy of Oscar. It's why he's so desperate to sell Richard on this big idea that he has for a new musical and almost begging Richard to work with him once again. I do wish the film spent more time tethering that through line with Lorenz's infatuation with Elizabeth and how that is born out of this deep loneliness, because those two threads are intimately related. But the screenplay is a little too ADD for me, and how it jumps around. It's a little too unfocused narratively, and that does mute my overall enjoyment with the film, or at least how effective I think it could have been. But Ethan Hawke is really, really great here. I don't know if it's his best performance, but it's certainly up there as one of his best, certainly one of his most memorable in some time. And he does carry this. I wholeheartedly agree with you there, regardless of how I feel about the screenplay and how it jumps around. Ethan Hawke, and really the supporting cast around him as well, but primarily Ethan Hawke does such a great job of grounding this film and its emotions, that volatility within the character, which isn't hidden. I do love that it's out in the open. It's something that he speaks to, that he even mocks at times in this film. It's loud, it's ambitious, it's outlandish in all of the best ways. So yeah, I really, really love Hawke here. It's one of my favorite performances of the year to this point.
Yeah, you're speaking to exactly what reservations I had about this script, as I sort of already talked about. And it sounds like you had some similar issues there. And again, I guess I just have to accept the fact that this is not going for the same level of philosophizing that we normally get in a Richard Linklater hangout movie. This movie, Blue Moon, is meant to be a bit more direct. Yet at the same time, I kind of miss that level of philosophizing, especially when some of the dialogue exchanges here feel like we're basically given thematic summations of this movie on a silver platter.
Yes.
I sometimes feel like these characters are essentially telling us as the audience, wink, wink, this is what this movie is actually about. And this is what this character is meant to feel. Some of these conversations, as great as these performances are, they don't always feel like organic conversations. And maybe that's also why some of these individual moments that are very much winks to the camera, like the whole scene with E.B. White or George Hill, like you already talked about. In the moment, I thought, okay, that's cute. And then I thought about it more. I was like, I don't like that was cute. And I wouldn't say the movie is winking at the camera in that way all that often, but there is a similar level of directness that the script kind of consistently has. It feels very much like it's trying to be a very easygoing stage play. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It might just be more of a subjective thing that I just like when a Linklater film leaves me feeling kind of unfulfilled. Like I meant to think about what these conversations these characters were having were all about. And I formulate my own kind of mental interpretation of it. This movie's telling me how to feel. And I did feel something. I very much did, because the performances here are doing the work. So you made a great point by calling this both a Richard Linklater film and an imitation of a Richard Linklater film. It somehow is both in a way.
It really is. No, I agree. And those Linklater isms are felt directorially because he is there behind the camera, but I do think that Linklater and perhaps Hawke himself, because obviously they've collaborated writing wise as well, that is missing on the page. And I did feel that disparity for sure. And I do love the directorial rhythms of this film and how he composes these characters, how he frames them, gives them space to chew on that dialogue. But the dialogue and the way it jumps around, I do think lacks that organic poetry, that organic touch that we typically get with Linklater, and it feels a little bit shoehorned, a little bit contrived in terms of how we get from one point to the next. For example, and I do want to be clear on this, I think that Patrick Kennedy is very good here as E.B. White, but the moment he's introduced, it is really funny, but in a way that I would like I say that as a criticism, because Lawrence is in the middle of having this frenetic conversation with Bobby Cannavale's Eddie character, the bartender.
The bartender, yeah.
And then there's the character that is playing the piano. And that's the Morty character, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they call him, do they call him Knuckles, I think?
Yes. So there's a three-headed conversation there with those characters. And then almost out of nowhere, Lawrence just peeks his head around a corner and, oh, there's a man just sitting there reading the newspaper. And he looks at him and he's like, "You're E.B. White, right?" Like, just out of nowhere.
You're not. It's a little more organic than that, but to your point, it still is more or less exactly how it plays. I think he goes, "Wait, I know you're a writer, aren't you?" He doesn't know his name right away, but he knows he is a writer. So naturally, the film contrives a certain occupational reason as to why they have to talk to each other now.
Yeah, it's just really funny how that comes about. Like, it didn't feel organic to me at all. And the same thing with George Hill when he comes in later on in the film. To your point, though, and I will give the film credit, those moments are a bit muted. They're not overwhelming this film at all, but it is evidence of how it's trying to be Linklater, but it's also pandering in this conventional sense that I just don't think is necessary at all. And in terms of focus and rhythm, I think where the film is like, it's trying to balance the duality of Lawrence, who he is in this moment, as it relates to his relationship with Richard and now this new formed jealousy that he has with Oscar. That's obviously a big part of this film once the party, finds its way to the bar. But there's also a through line here with Elizabeth, played by Margaret Qualley, and Lawrence's infatuation with her. He talks about her a lot in the opening. She shows up, and I guess to backtrack, he talks about her so much in the opening that it's almost like she's this mythical goddess. That's how we perceive her.
Yeah. So to the point that he may end up disregarding his own homosexuality because of her,
which is also important.
Yeah.
So he talks about her in that way. She shows up. We meet her. We see the beauty there, and then she disappears for a large majority of the film.
And it's not gone. And it's not like one of those disappearances where you wonder where she went. Like sometimes a great performance or a great character and their absence, they almost feel like this ghost kind of lingering. I don't think there's enough of her in that opening slot to really justify that.
No, I agree. I agree. And there is a huge scene between them at the end of the film, but I think that's a little bit good. It's too much too late in terms of the balancing act of this film. And I guess that's my ultimate point is it wants to be this movie about Lorenz and Richard and that dynamic. It's also Lorenz and Elizabeth, but because she's gone for so much of the film, that balancing act isn't there. So then when you're also shoehorning in these distracting moments with E.B. White and George Hill, that just adds further layers of disengagement that frustrates me when I really want to like what's going on here, because I do love the characters in a vacuum. I love the performances.
Me too.
I love the aesthetics. And I do want to talk about this setting and how it actually weaves its way into the film thematically. There is a lot to really like here. I just feel like the screenplay is it's just more imitative of Linklater instead of relying on that organic chemistry that Linklater is so known for. That like, if he could have had a hand in the writing, I don't know how much he did. As a director, it's impossible, especially with Linklater, not to assume that he had some hand as they were filming, but obviously not enough that he gets a co-writing credit here.
Yeah.
So like I don't know, like the disparity between the screenplay and Linklater's direction, it didn't always gel for me.
Honestly, I'm with you. It really is my biggest frustration with the film, and I don't want to get too caught up in the E.B. White, George Hill of it all. But for those of us who know art history or film history or even book history, you hear a name like E.B. White in a movie like this, your first thought is, oh, when are they going to drop that bomb? When are they going to make the Stuart Little reference or maybe even the Charlotte's Web reference? When's it going to happen? And then it does. So then you're constantly thinking about that and waiting for that.
Yeah. And how many biopics do that? They always bring in like, well, just because it's factual, just because he did go on to write those things doesn't mean that you have to give us that blatant, like, oh, I had a mouse in my apartment, I named him Stuart. Like, come on. That is way too much. Like the line where E.B. White says, I'm working on a children's novel next. That was enough. That's okay. I'm okay with that.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
That's all you need. You don't have to do that. And that's what I mean about when I say E.B. White and George Hill, it really is those eye-rolling moments of, well, we know what their careers are defined by, so we have to give them their own little origin story in this movie, which is just not necessary. But to be fair to E.B. White, that moment, the Stuart Little moment, not great. The introduction of him, as I noted earlier, I don't love that. Everything in between, though, with that character and with Patrick Kennedy's performance, I actually think is really good.
I like the conversations. I don't think you write him out of the movie.
Are good.
Yeah. He has a purpose in this movie. You don't write him out.
Yeah.
It's more so just the bookends of how they crystallize him to make a biopic-like point. And that's really the big issue. But it might sound like we're harping too much on very inconsequential moments of this movie, but in fact, I do think they are pretty consequential because they kind of represent our biggest overall problem with the movie, and that's how the script is so overly direct. Those are just really big examples of that directness, which is why if you go back to Richard Linklater's filmography, his last movie before this was Hitman, as you mentioned, the movie with Glenn Powell and Arjo Arjona. That movie certainly flows differently. That's not a hangout movie in the same way that this one is. But I think I would argue Hitman stays with you like a Linklater film would. I think on the page that feels more like a Richard Linklater film than this one does. On one hand, Linklater did have a say in the screenwriting in that one. He is credited as a co-writer, and the way that Hitman concludes, it leaves you dangling in a similar way as something like Everybody Wants Some would. Like there's a bit of a philosophical uncertainty with that movie that Blue Moon just doesn't quite have. It has the superficial Linklater-isms, but I don't think it quite has the same deep-rooted Linklater-isms that makes something like Before Sunset 1000% a Richard Linklater experience, right? It's one or the other, and I feel like these two latest films from Linklater either heighten one aspect and then the other one heightens the other aspect. And with a movie like this, given its very contained setting and the hangouty vibes of it, I did really miss the deep-rooted Linklater-isms that I've come to love. I really did miss that.
And I do think there's great potential here as it relates to what you're talking about there. That's why I do have to harp on and criticize the unfocused narrative. And yes, the moments of George Hill and E.B. White, the shoehorning in of those manufactured factual moments, if that's how you want to label them, Like those don't work for me, but more than that, it just kind of goes back to how it jumps around, how it doesn't know how to balance everything here. That to
Yeah.
me is a big problem because I do love fundamentally what this film is trying to do as it relates to being stuck in the past versus formulating a path forward in the future. I really love the duality of Lorenz feeling obsolete while feeling some sort of desperation to still matter as an
Yeah.
artist. There's, of course, the irony that they are celebrating the opening night of Oklahoma and its incredible success, with it being the first time that Richard and Lawrence did not work together. The loneliness and envy that we see in Lorenz is understandable, but it also heightens his fixation with Elizabeth and his desperation to sell that idea to Richard that we talked about earlier. While unrelated on its surface, Elizabeth and this grand opera that he wants to do, Elizabeth represents hope. She represents inspiration. She gives him a youthful vigor that has sprouted something new in him as an artist, which then gives birth to that crazy opera idea that he talks about. I also think that's why the setting here is also fascinating, because the reason Richard is now working with Oscar, it boils down to the fact that Lorenz is an alcoholic and had become too much of a problem for Richard. So setting this at a bar, this place of constant teasing and temptation, is a compelling metaphor for Lorenz's feeling of being stuck in the past and trying to formulate some sort of future. It's all converging in a singular space that has defined everything about him. I do really love that. And it's why, to your point earlier about some of the thematic notes here being on the nose, I really don't love, or excuse me, I really don't mind that Lorenz verbally has sparring here with Oscar.
Oh, I don't mind that
And
either. Yeah, I like
while
those scenes.
that can also be seen in under the similar vein of what we mentioned earlier with George Hill and E.B. White, because of course in those moments the film is wanting to highlight that irony that Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers would go on to be this iconic duo.
Yeah.
That is ultimately the historical wink wink that the film is going for there. But that makes thematic sense here. That makes
I agree.
emotional sense here. So I don't mind that as much. And I wish that the film, again, I know I mentioned this in my opening thoughts, but I wish the film really emphasized that more, and how Elizabeth Pitt plays a big, big role in it, which is why I don't love that she disappears for a majority of the film, because the loneliness that sprouts in him that plays in with the thread with Elizabeth, that is crucial. That plays into the envy, that plays into the jealousy. There was more than enough to mine with just that alone, that the film didn't need to bounce around the way that it
did
does.
not. No, and you know, going back to those scenes between Hart and Rogers, played by Ethan Hawke, obviously, and Andrew Scott, as you mentioned, there is a thematic directness in their conversations, but they also feel like organic conversations, which is the difference. And a lot of that is also due to their respective performances, but it also feels like what they would naturally talk about, as on the nose as it might be, given the circumstances of this partnership now fraying, and the resentment that they might have towards each other because of it, and the bitterness of that. Yet at the same time, as direct as those sequences might be, they also do offer a little bit of nuance as to how you can interpret what its thematic obviousness is meant to relate to. Because I kind of saw it as, and I don't know if this was the intent by Linklater or anyone involved here, I kind of saw it as this constant debate that we sometimes even have amongst film critics about the direction of where movies and art are ultimately going. Yeah, you know, like sometimes it goes into a more emotive or crowd pleasing direction, and whether that's even a good thing or not. Whereas Lorenz Hart is more, he still yearns for the bitterness and the cynicism of art. And
Yeah.
in a way, this movie is kind of arguing that there is a duality between both extremes in art, and we sometimes we sometimes argue for either one or the other. Like
Yeah.
in a way, there's almost like this meta component amongst even us as film critics, because we've had these conversations
Yeah.
before, right? And I think if anything, that's where the film is at its most fascinating, and finding a way
Yeah.
to actually feel like a contemporary depiction of what this past ultimately was.
No, I completely agree. I think that's why the Lorenz Richard conversations in this film are so fascinating, because you are 100% correct. This film is also about the dichotomy of art and commerce.
Mhm.
And how often do we have those conversations today?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. I don't know if that's the dialogue they were having in 1943 when this event took place, but I do love that fundamental philosophy debate of how Hart criticizes Oklahoma with the exclamation point. That is something that he brings up multiple times. in
Oh
this
yeah,
film,
yeah.
The
He call-
exclamation point.
He calls it an erect penis, and he's more
Yes.
interested in a half erect penis. That was actually a good line. That was a good line of
Yeah,
dialogue.
love that. And he talks about how sentimental it is, how it has this mass appeal, and he wants to maintain that, some level of criticism or cynicism, and he wants to remain in the world of satire. He doesn't just want to appeal to a large audience for the sake of commerce, for the sake of success. And so, yeah, the film absolutely raises those questions of, when the world moves on, what happens to the art that you make? And that is perhaps more than anything else what is at the heart of that duality with Lorenz. Obviously, with his alcoholism, that plays some sort of a role, but the way Lawrence reacts here, early on, you can sense that he's aware of it. Again, that's why all of this happening at a bar is so fascinating to me, because he is aware of the temptation. But once he gets into Richard's presence, it really has nothing to do with that. And more so, he is worried about being left behind. He's worried about becoming obsolete. And Oklahoma is this huge new sensation. So he sees the mass appeal in something like an Oklahoma, where his art is in this other direction. And if art is going to converge in this new direction, that's in this Oklahoma direction, what does that mean about the art that he made? And he is worried about that.
He is, yeah. And this is why, not to keep going back to the E.B. White and George Hill of it all, as much as we have issues with the way they're portrayed here, I don't think you get rid of those characters, because they do have thematic relevancy to this very point. Because E.B. White was a writer and a columnist at one point, and decided to then write a children's book, and that became his claim to fame. Is that his version of Oklahoma-ing his career? And then, and then George Hill, he's made many movies that we consider to be classics now. But you think about a movie like The Sting, which won Best Picture in 1973, 74, something like that. That's a crowd-pleasing movie. That's a very accessible movie. Is that also him Oklahoma-ing his career in a way? I get why they're here for that same level of thematic relevancy. We just didn't like the way that they were written into the overall narrative momentum of the actual movie. But I do think they all serve a grander point to what you're talking about there. And that's this fine line between, making art with emotional complexity, or whether or not it becomes pandering.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a relevant conversation.
No, I agree. The E.B. White and George Hill thing, that's an execution problem. There are ways to organically weave them into this narrative and where these characters find themselves. Again, the line of, I think I'm going to do a children's book next, that line in and of itself is indicative of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That he's maybe a little bit stuck as a writer himself. He does somewhat speak to that, not in those words, but more or less, and then lays it out there that I'm going to do a children's book next. You don't then have to overdo it.
Yeah.
You don't have to overdo it.
The point has been made.
The point has been made. Absolutely. And there's certainly a better way to do it with George Hill as well. But yeah, that duality of art and commerce and sticking to some sort of purity or your version of purity, under, and trying to maintain that despite where pop culture is going. That's something we still deal with today.
Yeah.
100%.
And what I do appreciate about the movie is that it doesn't become an indictment on this new evolution of where art is going.
Yeah.
The movie doesn't come out and say that Oklahoma is now a bad piece of art because it became a little bit more accessible for audiences. In many ways, Richard Rodgers is not wrong for saying he wants to now make art for audiences that want to feel things as opposed to think about things intellectually. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a fine thing. Like with George Hill making movies like The Sting or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They're crowd-pleasing movies, but many people would argue they are great movies, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, if anything, it's portraying just simply the evolution itself and how that's leaving one of its initial artists in the dust, and he can't find a way to progress along with it.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that is the point. It's less about the duality of art and commerce. Obviously, that is always going to be a central debate with art because it costs money to make these things.
Yeah.
But more than anything else, that's the emotional response to it. It is Hart realizing that he's on the verge of being obsolete, and how does he grapple with that? That's what's so fascinating here. And sometimes you have to find a middle ground. Just because you're doing something commercially doesn't mean that it is artless.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would say that about the Hammerstein-Rogers collaborations.
Absolutely.
They're great works of art, even though they have these wide-ranging appeals to them. They are great works of art. And you could say the same thing about E.B. White as well.
Yeah. This whole movie would be a great companion piece to the movie AI, Artificial Intelligence, just given the Kubrick and the Spielberg of it all, right? Because you kind of have that same duality represented in that movie. And in some ways, you could say Lorenz Hart's the Kubrick side of things, where maybe Rogers is trying to capture more of the sentimental side that art is now favoring. And he did a really great job at that, like Spielberg normally does. So it's kind of that same line, but like both can be true. You can have both forms of it nowadays.
Yeah, and I love how this film capitalizes on that with Lorenz, and how the film crystallizes at the end of the film, because again, as it relates to being stuck in the past versus converging with the new wave of pop culture, such as Oklahoma, as this film brings up as an example.
Yeah.
At the end of this film, when it is time to leave the bar for the party to move to a new location, everybody leaves, but what is the choice? Where is Lorenz at the end of this? Does he leave to go with the party? Does he leave to go be with the Oklahoma and that new wave of art? No, that's not what he chooses. That's not what he chooses. He continues to be stuck in his ways, continues to be stuck in the past. And unfortunately, if you know anything about Lorenz Hart and how he, devastatingly passes, there's obviously a lot of parallel there. Which is what the film, obviously that's the point. That's what they're trying to do there. And I do think that Linklater handles that with great diligence. I do love those artistic choices here as a director. So I mean, again, like I go back to I harp on my criticisms here because I do think there's a great movie in here somewhere, like a truly great movie in here. I don't think it quite gets there in the end, even though there's still a lot to appreciate.
No, and it's well directed too. I think
It is.
Linklater does a great job, channeling the whole like chamber drama aesthetic, because this all takes place really in one location for about 98% of it. The remaining 2%, you'll sometimes maybe get a shot outside or the opening in an alley, I'll simply say. And there's one brief moment where Lorenz Hart is at the actual premiere of Oklahoma and then leaves, which then kickstarts the drama. But that's it. It all takes place at this bar. And I think he does a great job adding some directorial versatility in allowing it to feel like there are still some like effortless scene changes by simply walking from the bar to the booth and then the booth to the bar. Like how there were scene changes in a movie like Before Sunset was the way that both Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke went from landmark to landmark or restaurant to restaurant, right? Here it's from bar to booth to bathroom to it's just a more contained version of that. But he does a great job navigating those chamber drama choices, I think.
Yeah. No, and as I noted, I think setting this at a bar is such a fascinating element to this film that does a great job of emphasizing and highlighting those central dualities that we've been talking about. And one moment that comes to mind is when Richard first gets there and Lawrence wants to do a toast with him, and Richard just flat out is like, "No, I'm not.
I'm
this with you.
I'm not drinking with you." Yeah,
not drinking with you." Just brazenly says it to his face, which again, it brings to the surface all of these challenges that he's been facing in terms of his own alcoholism, how it's affected his art, how it's created this disparity between him and Richard, how that then further heightens his envy with Oscar, something that he then has to grapple with later on in the film. So like setting this at a bar, it creates this ripple effect that I think is so fascinating. And that's just a simple little choice. I don't know if all of these events happened the way that they're depicted in the film. I can tell you almost confidently that at least some of them very much did not.
Hey, I don't mind that they didn't, but you're right.
which
Good
is
chunk of them
fine.
probably
That's more me going back to my points earlier.
Sure.
But regardless of that, I still think, setting this in one location at the Spar, Linklater does take advantage of it aesthetically, to your point, but I think it serves a great narrative, emotional, and thematic tool as well.
I agree. The way Casablanca is also referenced in this movie. There's a particular line from that movie.
Pretty funny, yeah.
Nobody ever loved me that much. It's utilized a few times here. It comes up towards the end in a way that I thought was very effective. I think that's certainly more the Linklater directorial touch than it is the screenplay. But again, there are moments here, exchanges specifically, that are very effective. I do think there is a lot about this movie that does work. I am still very high on the movie overall, but I am missing that deep-rooted philosophizing from Linklater that I think could have made this something special. I think it was definitely there.
Yeah, and it's here in spades. I just don't think it has that same organic feel to it.
I agree.
But anytime Lorenz opens his mouth, there's usually some level of philosophizing, especially early on in the film.
Sure.
And even that scene that he has with Elizabeth later on. I just wish that philosophizing carried more weight, I guess.
Well, and I think that's the thing, because again, you go back to a movie like Everybody Wants Some, the way that movie crystallizes on a note of philosophical ambiguity, that's the only way I can put it. It kind of invites us to partake in the conversation a little bit. And then as a result, I'm very much thinking about that movie for quite a while. It lingers for that reason. Blue Moon's not going to linger in that way for me. It's pretty immediate.
I agree.
Yeah, it's like by the time it ends, I'm not going to uncover new ideas from it. I feel like I've gotten everything I need from it. I could watch it again and enjoy it, but I don't think I'm going to uncover new meanings from it like I do other Linklater films.
And I agree. I very much do agree with that for sure. And I just wish that it was more diligent in how it structured this film, how it paced itself. Maybe not paced itself, but how it just jumped around. I think
Yeah.
is
Sure.
because like that scene with Elizabeth at the end, I do think is really great. But I just think
agree.
it's too much too late.
Yeah,
Like,
I,
it doesn't
I
really
can
bring
agree with
home.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something wonky about it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Anything else that you need to lay out here?
The only thing I'll say, and this is not really related to the quality of Blue Moon specifically, well, it kind of is, but Linklater has 2 movies coming out this year, as we noted.
Yeah.
The other one being, I'm blanking on the name, Nouvelle Vague, I believe it's
Yeah.
called, which is a reenactment of the making of Breathless, the French
Yeah.
New Wave film from 1960. And for what I understand, based on the early critic reactions to both of these movies, Blue Moon's the better movie. So that's interesting.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the Nouvelle Vague. I'm not sure how to say that, but
We'll do research to learn how it's pronounced before that review comes out.
that script has more than one person involved.
Mhm.
There's several different people involved with that script, and none of them have the name Richard Linklater. So
Well,
I don't
there
know.
you go.
I don't know. That one is hitting Netflix in just a few weeks on November 14th. So
hmm
it's coming up, but yeah, I've heard lesser things about it than Blue Moon. I do agree with you, but we'll see. If Blue
We'll see.
Moon is the best that he has this year, okay. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah,
make it sound like I don't like this film. I do. I did
I do
enjoy
too.
it.
It's
I just didn't love it.
it's mid-tier Linklater for me.
Yeah, that's ultimately where I'm at. But Ethan Hawke is fantastic. He is really, really great.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Certainly
I don't
one of
know
his-
where that
yeah.
performance ranks for me. I probably still like First Reformed. I'd probably go to First Reformed.
Yeah.
Really like Before Sunset as well. I don't know. Born to Be Blue. He is really great as Chet Baker.
That might be
as
my number
well.
one, actually.
That one's really great too. But
What-
it's like this performance is in that mix somewhere.
Maybe top
Somewhere.
3 performances from him in a Richard Linklater movie.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it'd be this and Before Sunset, probably the two.
I would take it over his Oscar-nominated turn in Boyhood, and that's not a knock on his performance in Boyhood. I think it's a very good performance.
Yeah.
This is the more complex performance in Blue Moon, I think.
That's fair. I do really love him. I mean, but he's also a supporting character in Boyhood, so I don't know.
It's not
how-
asking for the same level of
Yes. Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah. But I do love what he's doing in Blue Moon. And it's also a great example of why, like, sometimes there's just performances that are loud and showy and Oscar-y. This is not that for me. It's a little bit of that. It's certainly a little showy, and he's doing a lot. It's a bombastic performance, but I do agree with you. I think there's some great complexity here. I think that's what I really love about that whole conversation he has with Elizabeth. Narratively, I think it's too much too late, but performatively, like the way he just reacts to her throughout that whole conversation is, maybe pun intended, pretty breathless. Left me pretty breathless.
Yeah. No pun- yeah, nice work there. I love it.
I thought it was really
There's a
great.
great lead-in for his next movie.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Okay, I don't know if I have any other thoughts other than I guess I'll reiterate it. I really loved the music here.
Oh yeah, Graham Reynolds here.
Graham
Who
Reynolds.
has worked with Linklater a few times, if I'm
Couple
not
times.
mistaken. Yeah,
Hitman
composed
last year, I think.
Hitman, Scanner Darkly, Bernie.
Before Midnight, I believe.
Okay. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Looks like he was a composer in that film as well.
So
Last
yeah,
Flag
he's-
Flying. So I guess
yeah.
he's a Linklater boy.
Yeah, done a lot of Linklater movies. Yeah, really good stuff here. Again, love those piano motifs. Fantastic stuff. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, leave a comment below, or you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always hit us up. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. As we wind down here, we have a lot going on this week. You may have noticed already. So over the weekend, we had a review of Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere. Megan Kearns was joined by In Session Film writer Sharia Chavala for that conversation. Really good. And then Brendan and I, we talked about the new Catherine Bigelow film, Zero Dark 30 Part 2, also known as A House of Dynamite. That you can check out. That is available as well. You can go and check that one out on all of the platforms. Obviously, there's this review, and there's a fourth coming. There is another one on the way because there's a new horror film out. You may have heard of it. It's called Shelby Oaks. And we have a review of that coming out as well. It is not Brendan and I. That one is Megan Kearns once again. She's going to be joined by In-Session Film writer Max Vincent for that one. And then there's the main show, episode 660, I believe we're at. I don't know if that number is correct, but I think that's right. It's going to be Halloween related. So you can be on the lookout for that. New Women in Session at the end of the week. Lots of fun stuff happening at InSessionFilm.com as well. Oh boy, there's a lot going on.
We're busy, my man. We're
that
busy.
Time of year.
Absolutely.
That time of year. 2 more months, and then it's all done. 2 more months. 2025 is
and then
over.
we can stop. Then we're done. No more In-Session Film.
We're done.
Movies have ended. Paramount will buy Warner Brothers, and then movies will just end.
It's all over. The only hope is that Spike Jonze might be coming back. The whole first half of the main show this week is going to be nothing but that.
Oh,
just me talking about Spike Jonze maybe coming back.
Coming back with Charlie Kaufman.
With Charlie
right?
Kaufman, yes.
Yeah.
My prayers have been answered.
We'll talk about it more when we get to that show. So we may have lost a lot of listeners now, just given how long this has gone. But you just know that somehow this is going to be yet another extension of the Being John Malkovich adaptation universe. Maybe somehow it's going to be about Nicolas Cage playing, and he's going to be playing himself or something like that.
Yeah, it's going to be Nicolas Cage, and it's the making of adaptation. Yeah. So it's him playing himself.
Yeah. Or I guess Susan Orlean writing The Orchard Thief and how it would then get turned into a movie and that whole I don't know. There's a lot of different meta ways you can take this story.
There's a lot of fun. Yeah. Absolutely. Or Joaquin Phoenix comes back for Hers. Sequel. So be on the lookout for that too.
Get out late. Cinematic Universe.
Yeah. Either way, it should be exciting. With all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.